Final I rented a boyfriend for 800 yuan to go home, but accidentally ended up with a real CEO. The biting winter wind whipped through Yunhai Square, tugging at Xie Nianwei's coat and sending stray strands of hair across her face. She tucked the errant strands behind her ear, a nervous tic she hadn't realized she'd developed over the past few weeks. The square, usually bustling with life, felt strangely desolate in this corner, reserved for hushed negotiations and furtive glances, the blind date corner. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from the cold. This was it. Her last, desperate gamble. He arrived precisely on time. Tall, with an air of quiet confidence, he moved with an almost predatory grace that both intrigued and unsettled her. His face, partially obscured by the high collar of his coat and the shadow of a baseball cap, was nonetheless striking. A sharp jawline, a straight nose, and eyes that seemed to hold a wealth of unspoken stories. He looked expensive. Exactly the kind of man her family would approve of. And exactly the kind of man she couldn't afford. Monsieur. His voice was low and smooth, a surprising contrast to his somewhat rugged appearance. He gave a slight nod, acknowledging her presence without excessive formality. Mr. Gu. Her own voice was a breathy whisper, barely audible above the wind's mournful howl. She clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather. This whole situation felt surreal, like a scene from a bad drama. Was she really about to pay a stranger an exorbitant sum of money to pretend to be her boyfriend? The thought made her stomach churn. My associate informed you of the terms? He tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. She felt a blush creep up her neck. Was he judging her? He probably thought she was ridiculous. Desperate. Pathetic. The internal monologue spiraled downwards, each thought adding another layer of discomfort. 1 million, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Even saying the amount aloud felt absurd. 1 million yuan. It was a small fortune. More than she'd ever spent on anything in her life. But the alternative, facing the relentless barrage of questions, the thinly veiled pity, and the inevitable matchmaking attempts from her family, was unbearable. A flicker of something, amusement, surprise, crossed his face. He shifted his weight, the movement almost imperceptible, but she noticed it nonetheless. 1 million was the initial quote, Monsieur. For a week. You requested only the New Year period, 3 days. Her heart sank. Of course. She hadn't thought of that. She'd been so focused on escaping her family's judgment that she hadn't considered the practicalities. He continued, she asked for 1 million yuan to spend the new year, Mr. Gu. His voice mimicked hers, a subtle, almost teasing imitation that sent a wave of heat rushing to her cheeks. Who was this man? He paused, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. 800 is 800. I won't raise the price. 800,000. Still an astronomical sum. But significantly less than 1 million. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Could she afford it? She'd have to dip into her savings. Maybe even sell some investments. But wasn't her peace of mind worth it? All right, she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. The word felt heavy, laden with the weight of the charade they were about to embark on. What had she gotten herself into? He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. He wrote something down, tore off the page, and handed it to her. My number. Call me tomorrow evening. We'll discuss the details. His voice was brisk, professional. The transaction was complete. He turned to leave, his movements swift and decisive. She watched him disappear into the swirling crowd, a strange mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. She glanced down at the piece of paper in her hand. The number was written in a strong, bold hand. Beneath it, a single word, Fan. So, his name was Fan. Gu Fan. Her fake boyfriend. The lie had begun. She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. This new year was going to be interesting. The biting winter air nipped at Xian Yanwei's cheeks, a stark contrast to the burning anxiety churning in her stomach. Her breath plumed out in white puffs as she watched Gu Fan emerge from the taxi. He looked different. The casual attire she'd seen him in during their previous meetings had been replaced by a sharply tailored overcoat and a pair of leather gloves that looked softer than a baby's breath. He carried himself with an effortless grace, a stark contrast to the slightly awkward, almost shy demeanor he'd adopted in their staged, couple, photos. He actually looks the part, she thought, a flicker of relief warring with the gnawing unease of the elaborate lie she'd constructed. He spotted her, a faint smile playing on his lips, and a strange tightness gripped her chest. It wasn't unpleasant, just unexpected. He closed the distance between them, his footsteps muffled by the thin layer of snow dusting the ground. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low and resonant, a timbre she hadn't noticed before. "As I'll ever be," she replied, trying for a lightness she didn't feel. The lie felt heavier now, a lead weight dragging her down as they walked towards the looming doorway of her family home. The moment they stepped inside, the cacophony of familial chatter assaulted her ears. Her mother, a whirlwind of nervous energy in a bright red qipao, rushed forward, her eyes flitting between Xian Yanwei and Gu Fan with an intensity that bordered on predatory. "Yanwei, you're late. Everyone's been waiting." Her gaze, sharp and assessing, finally settled on Gu Fan. "And you must be Gu Fan," he supplied smoothly, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Auntie." Her mother's grip was surprisingly firm. Xian Yanwei could practically feel the unspoken questions radiating from her. "Where did you find him? What does he do? How much does he earn?" It was a familiar dance, one she'd been dreading for months. "Welcome, welcome," her father boomed, his voice laced with forced joviality. He shook Gu Fan's hand with an enthusiasm that felt almost aggressive. "So, young man, what line of work are you in?" The air crackled with anticipation. Xian Yanwei held her breath, her gaze fixed on Gu Fan, silently pleading with him to stick to the script. "I'm in finance," he answered vaguely, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second. A muscle twitched in his jaw, a subtle tell that she was beginning to recognize. The vagueness didn't escape her mother's notice. "Finance? That's a broad field. What company are you with?" Her tone, though seemingly polite, held a thinly veiled skepticism. Xian Yanwei saw the flicker of amusement in Gu Fan's eyes before he replied, "A small firm. Nothing you'd have heard of." He directed a small, almost imperceptible smile at her, a silent acknowledgement of the escalating deception. "He's enjoying this," she realized, a mixture of exasperation and fascination swirling within her. The interrogation continued throughout the evening, a relentless barrage of questions about his family, his education, his prospects. Each query was a tightrope walk, each answer a carefully crafted fabrication. Gu Fan, to his credit, navigated the minefield with surprising dexterity, weaving a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies that somehow managed to hold together. Aunt Sun, her mother's older sister, notorious for her sharp tongue and even sharper observations, piped up, "Finance, you say? My son-in-law, Lu, he's also in finance. Works at a big bank. You must know him." She named a prestigious international firm. Gu Fan's expression remained unchanged. I'm afraid I don't. My work is rather specialized. Xian Yinwei felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine. The lie was growing, becoming a monstrous entity threatening to swallow them whole. This was a mistake, she thought, the weight of her deception pressing down on her. Later, while helping her mother in the kitchen, Xian Yinwei's cousin, Xiufen, leaned in conspiratorially. Yinwei, are you sure about this guy? He seems shifty. You're not trying to avoid being cheated on a blind date, are you? Xiufen's words echoed Xian Yinwei's own anxieties. He's fine, she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. Just a little shy. Why do you want me to look like a bad person, she thought, directing her silent ire at Xiufen. Do you still need to report it to your mother, the evening wore on, a blur of forced smiles and strained conversations. The arrival of Zhou Xuchen, her colleague from Yunqing Group, added another layer of complexity to the already precarious situation. He recognized Gu Fan, of course, but thankfully, a carefully placed look from Gu Fan kept him silent. The tension, however, was palpable. Xian Yinwei could feel it radiating off him in waves, the unspoken question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. As the fireworks began to explode outside, painting the night sky in vibrant hues, Xian Yinwei found herself standing next to Gu Fan, the cacophony of the celebration a strange counterpoint to the silent turmoil within her. She glanced at him, his profile illuminated by the flickering light, and a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over her. The charade was becoming too much. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, the words barely audible above the din. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. What do you mean? This lie. It's getting out of control. A faint smile played on his lips. Don't worry, he said, his voice low and reassuring. I have a plan. His words, though meant to comfort, only served to deepen the mystery surrounding him. What plan could he possibly have? Xian Yinwei stared at him, a mixture of dread and a strange, unsettling anticipation coiling in her stomach. The fireworks continued to explode, their brilliance momentarily blinding her to the storm that was surely about to break. The aroma of stir-fried garlic chives and braised pork belly hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of familial expectation. Xian Yinwei picked at the glistening mound of rice in her bowl, each grain a tiny weight pressing down on her chest. Across the table, Gu Fan, her hired boyfriend, sat with an unnerving composure, his chopsticks moving with practiced elegance. He seemed utterly unfazed by the scrutinizing gazes of her extended family. How could he be so calm? Didn't he feel the invisible threads of interrogation tightening around them, the unspoken questions hanging in the air thicker than the steam rising from the dishes? Her aunt, Sun Li, the self-proclaimed matchmaker of the family, cleared her throat, a sound that always preceded some pointed remark. Yinwei, your boyfriend is very quiet, she observed, her eyes flitting between Gu Fan and the expensive watch on his wrist. Yinwei forced a smile. He's just a little shy around new people, aunt. Internally, she winced. Shy. This man exuded an aura of quiet power that could silence a boardroom. Shy was the last word she'd used to describe him. Wan Ting, her cousin, the epitome of smug marital bliss, chimed in, her voice dripping with feigned concern. He doesn't work at that internet cafe anymore, does he? The memory of their fabricated backstory Gu Fan as a struggling entrepreneur made Yinwei's stomach churn. She shot a panicked glance at Gu Fan, praying he'd play along. He met her gaze, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes, before smoothly replying, no, I've moved on to something else. Her cousin's boyfriend, Zhou Xuchen, a man whose ambition far outweighed his capabilities, narrowed his eyes. Yinwei knew that look. It was the look of a predator sensing weakness. Oh. And what would that be? He pressed, a smirk playing on his lips. He worked at Yunxing Group, a fact he never failed to flaunt. Nianwei held her breath. This was it. The tightrope she'd been walking was about to snap. I work in Yunxing Group, Gu Fan said, his voice calm and even. Nianwei's chopsticks clattered against her bowl. What was he doing? Zhou Xuchen raised an eyebrow, incredulous. Yunxing? In what capacity? He leaned forward, the challenge clear in his tone. Nianwei could feel the blood draining from her face. This charade was spiraling out of control. The company gave me a lot of shares to buy such a car, Gu Fan continued, gesturing vaguely towards the rented luxury car parked outside. The lie hung in the air, shimmering with audacity. Nianwei stared at him, a mixture of horror and morbid fascination swirling within her. He was doubling down, digging them deeper into this hole. Shares? Zhou Xuchen scoffed. I've been at Yunxing for 5 years and I haven't seen anyone get shares like that, especially to buy a car. What department are you in? His voice dripped with suspicion. Nianwei saw the tightening of Gu Fan's jaw, a subtle shift in his demeanor that sent a shiver down her spine. This was the first crack in his impeccable facade. The pressure was getting to him, too. Before he could answer, she blurted out, He rented the car. The words tumbled out, a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, but they only seemed to make it worse. A wave of silence washed over the table. Every pair of eyes was fixed on her, a mixture of confusion and disbelief etched on their faces. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Rented? Nianwei, what's going on? The truth, sharp and bitter, rose in Nianwei's throat. She couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. The web of lies had become too tangled, too suffocating. He's not really my boyfriend, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. The dam had broken. A cacophony of voices erupted around her, a chorus of questions and accusations. Her father's face hardened with disappointment. Her aunt's whispers turned into open gasps of shock. Wang Ting's smugness morphed into outright glee. Zhou Xuchen, however, remained silent, his eyes narrowed, a calculating glint in their depths. He seemed to be piecing together the puzzle, the realization of Gu Fan's true identity dawning on him. I hired him, Nianwei continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. I didn't want to face all the questions. The confession felt like a physical burden lifted from her shoulders. The weight of the lie, the constant fear of exposure, had been crushing her. Gu Fan remained silent, his gaze fixed on her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to deny it. He simply let her unravel the truth, thread by thread. The air crackled with tension, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the room. Who was this man? Why would he agree to such a charade? And what were the consequences of this elaborate deception? Nianwei's gaze darted around the room, taking in the shocked faces of her family. Her aunt was whispering furiously to her mother, who looked as though she might faint. Her father's disappointment was palpable, a heavy weight settling over the room. Even Wang Ting seemed momentarily speechless, her usual smugness replaced by a stunned silence. And then, amidst the chaos, Zhou Xuchen spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Yunxing shares a car, he muttered, his eyes fixed on Gu Fan. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't tell me, he began, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. You wouldn't be, the unspoken question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nianwei's heart pounded in her chest. She had unleashed a storm she couldn't control. The lies had spiraled out of control, and now, the truth threatened to shatter everything. The opulent dining room of the Tianqing Hotel shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. The aroma of expensive wine mingled with the delicate scent of lilies, a stark contrast to the tension-tightening Xia Nianwei's chest. Her elaborate charade, meticulously constructed to appease her family, felt precariously balanced on the edge of a cliff, and every passing second threatened to send it tumbling into the abyss. Her relatives, a chorus of scrutinizing eyes and whispered judgments, circled Gu Fan like hawks, their questions sharp and pointed. Aunt Sun, never one to miss an opportunity for subtle one-upmanship, had initiated the interrogation, her smile as brittle as the fine china on the table. "So, Xiao Fan," she'd purred, her gaze flitting to the expensive watch on his wrist, "Nianwei tells us you work at Yunsheng. Such a prestigious company. What department are you in?" Nianwei felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. Gu Fan, throughout this entire ordeal, had maintained an unervingly calm facade. He'd answered their incessant questions with a polite detachment that both impressed and worried her. He was playing the role of perfect boyfriend a little too well. Now, facing Aunt Sun's pointed inquiry, his lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm involved in several projects," he replied, his voice smooth as silk. The vague answer, however, only fueled the flames of suspicion. Nianwei's mother, her face a mask of strained cheerfulness, chimed in, "Yes, Yunsheng is quite a large corporation. It's easy to get lost in the shuffle. Perhaps you have a business card, Xiao Fan. It would be lovely to have something to remember this occasion by." Her words, though seemingly innocuous, carried a weight of expectation that made Nianwei's stomach churn. A business card. Such a simple request, yet it held the potential to unravel everything. Gu Fan's gaze met Nianwei's for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He reached into his jacket, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and produced a sleek, black card. Nianwei held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't see what it was, but the sudden hush that fell over the table was more telling than any words. Her relatives leaned in, their faces a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed avarice. Aunt Sun snatched the card, her eyes widening as she scanned it. A ripple of gasps and murmurs spread through the table like wildfire. Nianwei's father cleared his throat, his expression shifting from skeptical scrutiny to stunned disbelief. Lu, Nianwei's cousin, let out a low whistle. Xiufan elbowed Wang Ting, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Nianwei felt a cold dread seep into her bones. What had he done? Gu Fan remained impassive, his expression giving nothing away. He simply took a sip of his wine, the crystal glass catching the light and casting fleeting shadows on his face. This is," Aunt Sun stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at Gu Fan, then at the card, then back at Gu Fan, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm the president card," Gu Fan said calmly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Nianwei's world tilted on its axis. The president card. The president. He was the president of Yunsheng. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. All this time she had been her thoughts scattered like frightened birds, leaving a gaping emptiness in their wake. She had hired the president of Yunsheng Group to be her fake boyfriend. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clinking of silverware as her relatives, one by one, dropped their forks and spoons. Nianwei's mother's carefully constructed facade crumbled, replaced by a mixture of shock and horrified embarrassment. Her father, normally so stoic, looked as if he might faint. The whispers started again, this time laced with a mixture of awe and fear. Zhou Xuchen, her colleague from Yunsheng, who had been invited by her mother in a thinly veiled attempt to set them up, paled visibly. He'd been bragging all evening about his connections within the company, subtly implying his own importance. Now, faced with the actual president, he looked like a deflated balloon. He stammered, but President Gu I didn't." Gu Fan turned his gaze towards Zhou Xuchen, his eyes cold and sharp. Nianwei watched, a strange mixture of dread and a perverse sense of satisfaction churning within her. "Zhou Xuchen," Gu Fan said, his voice dangerously low. "I believe you were the one who informed me about certain irregularities in the procurement department." Zhou Xuchen's face turned ashen. I was just trying to improve efficiency." Gu Fan finished, his voice laced with icy sarcasm. "By leaking confidential information to our competitors?" Zhou Xuchen opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Nianwei watched, mesmerized, as the man who had spent the entire evening subtly belittling her and flaunting his supposed connections crumbled under Gu Fan's gaze. The arrival of Li Qingfeng, Gu Fan's cousin and the vice president of Yunsheng, added another layer of chaos to the already volatile situation. Li Qingfeng, usually so smooth and composed, looked flustered and apologetic. He stammered out explanations about a misunderstanding, about Zhou Xuchen's misguided attempts to impress. But Gu Fan was implacable. As the president of Yunsheng Group, Gu Fan stated, his voice ringing with authority, "I will never tolerate such a moth living in my company." He turned his gaze back to Zhou Xuchen, his eyes like shards of ice. "You are fired, effective immediately. And as for you, Qingfeng," he turned to his cousin, his voice losing none of its steel. "Your negligence in overseeing your department has allowed this to happen. Consider this a severe warning. One more such incident, and you will be joining Mr. Zhou on the unemployment line." The air in the room crackled with tension. Nianwei's relatives sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. The elaborate charade, meant to protect her from their judgment, had exploded in a spectacular display of unintended consequences. She looked at Gu Fan, the man who had started as a hired actor, now the epicenter of this familial earthquake. He met her gaze, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his eyes. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Nianwei felt a strange, unsettling flutter of something that might, just might, be something more than panic. The remnants of firecrackers littered the streets, a faded testament to the boisterous New Year celebrations. Inside, the air hung heavy, not with the aroma of festive food, but with the thick, suffocating scent of apology. Xie Nianwei watched her mother flit around Gu Yunze, offering him tea, pastries, apologies wrapped in layers of forced cheerfulness. Her father, usually a stoic figure, sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, nodding along with each effusive word. Nianwei could almost feel the shift in the atmosphere, a palpable change from the judgmental tension of the previous day. "They're only this nice because they think he's rich," she thought cynically, a bitter taste rising in her throat. She knew her family. Respect, in their world, was a currency, and Gu Yunze's revealed wealth was the winning exchange rate. "Mr. Gu, please, forgive our previous misunderstandings," her mother chirped, her voice a little too high, a little too sweet. "We never imagined well, you understand. We just want the best for Nianwei." Gu Yunze accepted the tea with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "No worries, Auntie. It's all understandable." His gaze flickered towards Nianwei, a brief connection that sent a strange shiver down her spine. He's enjoying this, she realized, a flicker of amusement warring with her resentment. He was playing the role perfectly, the benevolent, forgiving CEO. The charade continued, a grotesque pantomime of familial harmony, until a sharp knock at the door sliced through the manufactured peace. Nianwei's heart sank. She recognized the aggressive rhythm, the impatient rapping that could only belong to one person, Chao Tong, her ex-boyfriend. What's he doing here? Panic tightened its icy grip around her chest. This was the last thing she needed, another layer of chaos piled onto the already precarious situation. Chao Tong strode in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He saw Gu Yunze, and his expression darkened further. "You," he snarled, pointing a finger. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal what's mine?" Nianwei's parents exchanged bewildered glances. "What's going on here, Nianwei?" her father demanded, his voice edged with suspicion. Before Nianwei could stammer out an explanation, Chao Tong launched into a tirade, his voice rising with each word. He accused Nianwei of owing him money, of leading him on, of using him. The lies tumbled out of his mouth, each one more outrageous than the last. Nianwei's mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the situation, to silence him before he revealed the truth about their fake relationship. "If you dare to mess with me," Chao Tong sneered, his eyes fixed on Gu Yunze, "do you know who I'm hanging out with?" He puffed out his chest, attempting to project an air of menace that fell utterly flat against Gu Yunze's calm demeanor. Gu Yunze simply raised an eyebrow, an almost imperceptible movement that somehow conveyed more power than any shouted threat. "I asked him to do this card," he said, his voice low and even. He produced a small, black card from his pocket and placed it on the table. The room fell silent. Nianwei watched, mesmerized, as Chao Tong's bravado evaporated. He picked up the card, his fingers trembling, and his eyes widened in recognition. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of white. He stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Nianwei's relatives, drawn by the commotion, crowded around the doorway, whispering amongst themselves. Aunt Sun, never one to miss a spectacle, elbowed her way to the front, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Gu Yunze turned to Nianwei's parents, his expression carefully neutral. "I apologize for this unpleasant interruption," he said smoothly. "Mr. Chao seems to have some personal matters to resolve with Miss Xie. Perhaps it would be best if we discussed this privately." He directed a pointed look at Chao Tong, who was still clutching the card as if it were a lifeline. Chao Tong, without a word, backed away, his eyes fixed on Gu Yunze. He mumbled an apology, a pathetic whimper compared to his earlier bluster, and practically fled the house. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Nianwei's relatives exchanged bewildered glances, their whispers growing louder. Nianwei felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Gu Yunze had handled the situation with an effortless authority that both impressed and unnerved her. "Who is this man?" she wondered, her gaze fixed on his impassive face. He was no longer just a hired boyfriend, a convenient prop in her family drama. He was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite comprehend. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Nianwei's relatives, their curiosity piqued, peppered her with questions, their earlier judgment replaced by a strange mix of awe and respect. Nianwei offered vague answers, deflecting their inquiries with a forced smile. The weight of the charade pressed down on her, heavier now than ever before. As evening descended, and the remnants of the day faded into the soft glow of streetlights, Nianwei found herself alone with Gu Yunze. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words, with the echoes of the day's chaotic events. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the detached businessman she had hired, but a man of hidden depths, of unexpected complexities. He was a puzzle she suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to solve. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze, his eyes unreadable. "For what?" "For everything," she replied, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. "For dealing with Chao Tong, for pretending." A faint smile played on his lips. "Don't mention it." The silence returned, but it was different now, charged with a strange energy, a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. The charade was far from over, but the rules had changed, the lines blurred. And in the midst of the chaos, a new, unexpected feeling began to bloom, a delicate bud of something that might, just might, be more than pretense. The scent of burnt incense lingered in the air, a faint ghost of the boisterous festivities that had filled the Xie family home for the past week. The red paper lanterns, now slightly faded, swayed gently in the breeze filtering through the open doorway. A quiet melancholy had settled over the house, the inevitable lull after the storm of relatives, the echoes of laughter and the clatter of mahjong tiles now replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Xian Yinwei watched Gu Yunze button his coat, the simple act imbued with a strange poignancy. He looked different today, the playful facade he'd worn for her family replaced with a quiet composure, a subtle shift back towards the man she'd first met in that crowded cafe. A pang of something akin to loss resonated within her. This charade, this elaborate performance they'd orchestrated, was ending. And with it, a strange, unexpected warmth she hadn't realized she'd grown accustomed to. "Thank you," she murmured, the words inadequate for the complex tapestry of emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, yes, for navigating the minefield of her family with surprising grace and humor. But also, a flicker of regret, a whisper of what if. What if this wasn't a performance? What if this connection, however fleeting, could have been something more? She pushed the thought away, a dangerous tendril of wishful thinking. He was Gu Fan, her hired boyfriend. Nothing more. He met her gaze, his dark eyes holding a depth she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps she had simply been too preoccupied with managing the chaos around them to truly see. "It was an experience," he replied, a hint of amusement playing at the corner of his lips. An experience. Was that all this was to him? An amusing anecdote to share with his colleagues over expensive whiskey? The thought stung, a sharp prick of disappointment. She began, then hesitated, unsure of what she wanted to say. "Thank you for pretending to care. Thank you for not exposing me as the desperate, single woman my family believes me to be." The words felt hollow, inadequate. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. She swallowed, forcing a smile. "Safe travels." The words felt stiff, formal, a stark contrast to the easy banter they had shared over the past few days. He nodded, a fleeting expression crossing his face, something she couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Longing? She shook her head, dismissing the thought as absurd. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly too quiet house. At the doorway, he paused, glancing back. "Xian Yinwei," he said, his voice low and resonant, stripping away the last vestiges of the playful Gu Fan persona. "I saw your portfolio. The designs for the Tianqing Hotel renovation. I think you are very qualified." Her breath caught in her throat. Tianqing Hotel. Yunqing Group. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information. The subtle hints, the casual mentions of his work, the way he had navigated the business conversations with her uncle. A chilling realization dawned on her. Could it be? He held her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Let's get to know each other again," he said, a cryptic smile playing on his lips. Then, he was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway, the scent of burnt incense heavy in the air, her mind reeling. The following days were a blur. The silence of the empty house pressed down on her, amplifying the questions swirling in her mind. Gu Fan Gu Yunze, the president of Yunqing Group. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Had he orchestrated this entire charade? Was their meeting in the cafe a coincidence, or a carefully planned encounter? She replayed their conversations, searching for clues, for hints she might have missed. The way he had steered her away from certain topics, the subtle probing questions about her work, it all pointed to a deliberate manipulation. Then, the call came. An invitation for an interview at Yunxin Group, for a senior design position. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was it. Her chance to prove herself, to step out from the shadow of her family's expectations. But also, a chance to confront him, to demand answers. She accepted the interview, a quiet determination hardening her resolve. She would face him, not as the desperate Xie Nianwei seeking a temporary reprieve from familial pressure, but as a talented designer, worthy of respect and recognition. This was more than just a job, it was an opportunity to rewrite the narrative, to reclaim her own story. The game, it seemed, had just begun. The biting January wind whipped through the concrete canyons of the financial district, stinging Xie Nianwei's cheeks as she hurried towards the imposing glass and steel structure of the Yunxin Group headquarters. Her breath plumed out in frosty puffs, mirroring the nervous flutter in her stomach. This interview, for a project manager position, was crucial. Not just for her career, but for her sanity. Another week of her mother's relentless matchmaking attempts and she swore she'd spontaneously combust. A new job, a demanding one, would be the perfect excuse to escape the suffocating pressure of familial expectations. Focus, Nianwei, she muttered to herself, smoothing down her charcoal gray blazer. This is about your future. The Yunxin lobby was a testament to corporate power. Sleek marble floors reflected the ambient light, casting a cool, almost sterile glow. The air hummed with quiet efficiency, the low murmur of conversations punctuated by the click of heels on the polished surface. Nianwei joined the small cluster of interviewees huddled near the reception desk, each radiating a carefully constructed air of confidence. She studied them covertly, assessing the competition. A man in a sharp, navy suit, his phone glued to his ear, exuded an air of aggressive ambition. A young woman with impeccably styled hair and a designer handbag clutched a portfolio like a shield. Nianwei felt a familiar pang of self-doubt. Did she truly belong here, amidst these polished professionals? She pushed the thought away, reminding herself of her qualifications, her experience. She deserved this chance. As the minutes ticked by, a palpable tension filled the air. The silence was broken by the arrival of a woman in a vibrant red dress, her entrance as dramatic as a sudden splash of paint on a monochrome canvas. She moved with a practiced grace, her smile dazzling as she greeted the receptionist with an almost theatrical familiarity. Nianwei watched, a knot tightening in her stomach, as the woman subtly positioned herself closer to the interview room door, her body language screaming ambition. Typical, Nianwei thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. This was exactly the kind of cutthroat competition she'd been dreading. Suddenly, the woman turned, her smile sharpening into something less friendly as her gaze landed on Nianwei's resume, which she had inadvertently left on the table next to her. Nianwei watched in disbelief as the woman, with a swift, almost imperceptible movement, accidentally knocked over her coffee, the dark liquid spreading across the pristine white paper, obscuring her qualifications in a spreading brown stain. For a moment, Nianwei was speechless, the audacity of the act leaving her stunned. Then, a slow burn of anger began to simmer in her chest. This wasn't just competition, it was sabotage. The red-dressed woman offered a perfunctory apology, her eyes gleaming with a smug satisfaction that made Nianwei's blood boil. But instead of reacting, instead of letting the anger consume her, Nianwei took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. This petty act wouldn't derail her. She had faced worse. She excused herself, walked calmly to the restroom, and salvaged what she could of her resume, dabbing at the stain with wet paper towels. The damage was done, but the act of regaining control, of refusing to be intimidated, steadied her nerves. When Nianwei returned, the receptionist, her face etched with concern, offered her a new application form. Nianwei accepted it with a grateful smile, a quiet strength settling within her. She wouldn't let this incident define her. The interview room was surprisingly minimalist. A large, glass-topped table dominated the space, reflecting the city skyline spread out beyond the panoramic windows. Behind the table sat a man Nianwei recognized instantly. Gu Fan. Her hired boyfriend. Her fake fiancé. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He was different. Gone was the casual attire he'd worn during their charade. He was dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean frame, his expression serious, almost austere. He exuded an aura of power, of command, that was both intimidating and strangely alluring. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of recognition, quickly masked, crossing his features. For a heartbeat, the air crackled with an unspoken tension. Then, he spoke, his voice smooth, controlled. "Ms. Xie, please have a seat." His eyes, dark and inscrutable, held hers for a moment longer than necessary, leaving her feeling strangely exposed. The interview began, a surreal dance of pretense and professionalism. Nianwei answered his questions, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the man before her with the one who had so convincingly played the role of her devoted boyfriend. He listened intently, his expression giving nothing away. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence, of the subtle shift in his posture, the way his fingers tapped lightly on the glass tabletop. As the interview progressed, a strange sense of calm descended upon Nianwei. She realized, with a surprising clarity, that she was no longer acting. She was simply being herself, showcasing her skills, her experience, her passion for the work. Perhaps the charade with Gu Fan, the forced intimacy of their pretend relationship, had stripped away a layer of pretense, allowing her to connect with a deeper, more authentic part of herself. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "Ms. Xie," he began, a subtle change in his tone, a hint of something personal creeping into his voice. "There seems to be a discrepancy between the qualifications listed on this application and the one you submitted earlier." Nianwei's heart skipped a beat. So, he had noticed. She braced herself, preparing to explain, to apologize, to somehow salvage the situation. But then, he smiled, a slow, almost mischievous curve of his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles, revealing a glimpse of the man she had come to know, the man who had pretended to be her fiancé. "Before we discuss that," he continued, his voice now laced with a subtle amusement, "I believe there's something I need to clarify." He stood up, his tall frame dominating the room, and walked around the table, stopping directly in front of her. He looked down at her, his eyes holding hers, a strange intensity burning in their depths. "I am the president of Yunxin Group, Gu Yunze," he said, his voice low, resonant. "Let's get to know each other again." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Gu Fan Gu Yunze, the hired boyfriend, the president of Yunxin Group. The pieces clicked into place, the fragmented memories of their interactions suddenly forming a coherent, almost unbelievable picture. The expensive car, the casual dismissal of the fee, the air of quiet authority, it all made sense now. She stared at him, her mind reeling, struggling to process the enormity of the revelation. A wave of emotions washed over her. Shock. Disbelief. A flicker of anger. And a strange sense of relief. She had been so focused on maintaining the facade, on protecting herself from the judgment of her family, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly see him. To see the man behind the mask. And now, here he was, revealing himself, stripping away the pretense, offering her a chance to what? Start over. He extended his hand, a silent invitation. Nianwei looked at it, her mind racing. This was a turning point, a crossroads. She could walk away, pretend this had never happened, cling to the safety of her carefully constructed life. Or she could take a leap of faith. She could accept his offer, embrace the uncertainty, and see where this unexpected path might lead. She took his hand, her fingers closing around his, a spark of something unexpected passing between them. The city lights glittered outside the panoramic window, a backdrop to this strange, surreal moment. The interview was over. But something new, something infinitely more complex, had just begun.